Good afternoon, guys. Amit sir is here with us. We are just about to start our
Good afternoon, guys. So I'm going to start the session. So guys, we are continuing with the session because we just kick-started the JavaScript stuff, and this session is mostly involving using the HTML and the CSS and the JavaScript. It's just a kickstart of this. and somehow the VS Code setup, all of these things. But first of all, because we are in the continuation of the JavaScript, so we will just walk through the JavaScript stuff, because there is no sense to use HTML CSS without the JavaScript, because otherwise it is just a static website. To make the things dynamic, that's why first of all we have some glance of the JavaScript, then we move to the VS Code. So at the end of today's session, I will share some videos links with you. So you need to just watch those videos also. That's most on the installation setup side. So when we come tomorrow, so we have at least the installation in our machine, right? For JavaScript stuff, there is no need to install anything because we have only the browser. But somehow for HTML and the CSS stuff, we need VS Code. So I will share some video link with you. So you use that video to learn the stuff, right? That is a VS Code setup and some VS Code tricks. So moving back, we have covered something called data types. We just started because we are right now we are seeing everything from the 10,000 feet. So we are just touching everything right now. And we have done this data types, right? And we have done everything with the primitives and the reference type, and we just started the reference types. So we are going more detail on the reference side, and then we are learning rest of the stuffs. So we will explore more areas of the JavaScript. So the how the things will be going on, I just want to glance, because we are starting with the JavaScript stuff. So we are right now on the JS part, and we integrate the JS with HTML and the CSS later on, right? Because today is just a basic start of this JS stuff, and then we are integrating with HTML and CSS stuff. So we need to set up all this stuff by using VS Code. That's why I will share some video links for setting up the VS Code and how you can set up the plugins, rest of things. That's why I share this video with you. That is a set of videos. And today's agenda is to somehow just learn more JavaScript stuff, so we can use all this stuff in making our web page, right? For making our web page, we use HTML and CSS. So we will start with a zero HTML with zero CSS knowledge, and then we build some applications, right? Now this course also covers some more detail of the CSS. We will see later on, but today the agenda is to start with the JS. So this course is like somehow something is more coding. Like when we are doing the JavaScript stuff, we are doing a lot of coding. When we're talking about the HTML CSS, that would be like a relaxation thing for all of you, because you're doing more on the designing side. So designing side is much easier than the coding side, right? So right now we started with the JS, right? So we understand somehow with the JavaScript stuff. Now from here we are moving on more detail of reference type, because we learn two reference data types. So in reference data type, we have communicated two things. One is the array stuff, and one is the creating this object, right? And this object is, I told you, this object is coming from where? It is coming from the object, right? And this object is somehow is a function. It's a top level function, right? It's a top level function. Now the thing is, I am going in more detail of this side. I'm going in more detail of the reference types. So when we talk about the reference type, JavaScript does this thing, that is, they are saying when you're using a reference type. So I just little bit scroll up this thing. So from here, they are suggesting for creating a string, right? For creating a string, we start with a string thing. You write this thing. So, meanwhile, what I will do, I will create another about blank, so it would not be mixed with this, right? Because that is for the first half, right? So I create another about blank, and from here we will start this half coding, right? So when we define like this, where a equals to Amit, right? So that is a string we have defined. So if I do type of a, you will know this is a string internally. It's not an object because it's coming as a string. Makes sense. And when it has become an object, it means it is like when it is object, it means it has predefined functions, right? When it is an object, it has predefined functions. So when I do this thing where b equals to new string, and I am specifying Amit here. When I'm specifying here where b equals to new string Amit, when I does this thing, so it means you are creating a object. You're creating an object. So new string, and if you just check it out, string s is capital, and it seems like a class, but it's a function, right? So if you just check it out, type of string says I am a function. But when you use a new keyword, so you are creating an object. So now this time b is not a string, b is an object. How you can check it out? Type of b. So it seems like it's a object, right? It's an object, and because it's an object, so when you do b dot, you will see there are plenty of functions are there, like to uppercase. So I can make it as an uppercase. I have the function called to lowercase, so I can make it lowercase, and plenty of them. And these plenty of them is because I created a new string stuff. Makes sense, guys? So the point number one is whatever the data type we have learned that is coming in a small, it has the capital thing, and that capital thing is like a wrapper. It's like a wrapper. So they wrap it something and they create an objects type. So it means in our list we can have the third thing that is coming up, that is a string. So string as well as string is treated as a reference type, right? So it means when we define b equals to new string Amit, behind the scene it create an Amit, and it has a memory address, let's say 99, and it is assigned to the b, right? So b is pointing to this 99. I hope, guys, this makes sense. So b is become a reference, right? So b is become a reference type, right? So the pointer is we understand what exactly a reference type. So it means for each data type, whatever we have learned, all data types has a reference type. So if we just go to the board, and in board, if we see this thing, we learn boolean, we learn number, we learn string. So the boolean, number, and string all have the thing called that is, it has something called string, that is a now is a coming in a reference category, but this one string is coming as a small string. Makes sense? Number is in small. So number, I have the number as a capital, start with the capital letter. I have the boolean which is start with a capital letter. So these all are the wrappers types. So that's why it is called a reference types. So JavaScript does this thing. So the point is, whatever you have learned in the primitive, it is treated as an object type, right? So that's why I'm saying it's everything is an object for us. So the pointer is when I define where b equals to new string Amit, so it means b having a reference of Amit, and that's why I'm able to use b dot to uppercase. It means go to the 99 and make it uppercase, go to the 99, make it lowercase. I hope, guys, this makes sense how this where b is actually working. Now the point number two is when you define this a, which is Amit, right? And we know this is type of a string. Now the twist in the story is when you use a dot to uppercase, you will get this thing. It means on the runtime, it will treat it like an object. On the runtime, it will treat it like an object. So when you write a dot to uppercase, it will be now behave like an object. So the point is, Vikas is asking, if you check out this thing, because everything is written here. So if you check out this thing, I write where b equals to new string Amit, and when I do type of b, you are able to see it's an object, right? So b is an object of what? Of function of string, because everything, whenever you create an object, in previous class I told, whenever you create an object, you always create an object through a function. There is no concept of class, right? So when you do this thing, type of string, that's a capital one, it is saying I'm a function. Makes sense? So it's a function. Through function we derive an object. I hope, guys, this thing is clear. So the same story. So the same story will be like when I do where e equals to new number. So the point is, it is again treated as a object. So if you do type of e, it is saying I'm an object. Now it's an object of whom? It is an object of number. I hope, guys, this makes sense. So Vikas is asking, doesn't class have object only? It has, but the point is, because if you just go in deep, you understand, because most of the time when we learn object-oriented thing, we understand on the class and object. If you go in more detail, if you think twice, thrice, you will understand why I learn classes, why you learn classes. The reason behind is, so that is the reason I am giving you why you learn classes. Because when you learn C language, the problem is you create functions. For example, suppose you create a function called, I just give a name, just clear it out this thing. And let's say in a C language, suppose you are working on some project and you create a function called add to do some addition of a number, right? Some other programmer want to do the same add stuff, but not addition. He want to add an order. So he want to add an order, right, in shopping. Another developer want to do the add, but it is not again for the addition. He want to add a payment, right? And there is another add who is responsible to, let's say, add a new customer. So the fundamentally rule is we have different add. One add, this one is doing the plus operation. This add is doing the order operation. This add is doing the customer operation. This add is doing the payment operation. Now the problem is, if my developers are going to create add and these add are the global, remember this thing, these all add are the global functions, because the C has this problem, because these functions are not under some curly bracket. So that's why these are called global functions. I mean, it's Amar, right? So it's a global one. So it never did. If it is never dead, so it will get conflicted with other functions. Make sense? It will get conflicted with other functions. That's why somebody create the object-oriented thing. So object-oriented thing says put this function inside a curly bracket and make it a class, and make it a class called calculator. So now this add belongs to the calculator, right? Same thing here. If I do here class and I specify class and I specify class customer, or let's say payment, I use a word called payment. So I just clear out this thing. So if I use a word called class and then I use a word called payment, so this payment class belongs to the payment stuff. Now this add would not be conflict with calc, and calc would not be conflict with this payment, right? That's why they create the concept of classes. So classes is actually wrapping of your variables and functions together. That is called encapsulation. Makes sense? So the same stuff they did the same stuff, but they are saying we are not doing this with a class, we are doing with a function. So calc is no more a class, it's a function. Payment is no more a class, it's a function. So it means they have the concept of outer function and inner function. And through outer function and inner function, you are wrapping the functions. It means you are localizing the function. Your add function is now local of calc function. Your payment add is become a local function, right? So it means it never get conflicted. I hope I answer your question, Vikas. So it does not have any class. It's a wonderful thing. They have created some new inventions. They are saying why you want to learn the classes, why you are using the same thing with a function. So that's a very much easier programming, right? So we have understand this concept, how this object, why they are not using this object and stuff, why they are using everything with a function. And we will do some practical exercises to understand more things, because we are right now in a very basic phase. So the point number one is, now you have this number itself is a function, and this number is also responsible to create an object. So E is an instance of a number. So the pointer is for learning is whatever the reference type we are learning here, it is derived from the primitives. It means that is a primary data type. For Boolean, they have done capital Boolean. For number, they have done capital number. For small string, they have done capital string. Plus, they have invented array and object. Right. So the pointer is everything is an object for us. So the point number one is, if you define some variable like this, for example, if I am saying variable f equals to 100. So f is 100 now, and we know type of f says I am not an object, I am a number. I am not an object, I am a number, right? But we check it out the same thing, where e equals to new number. So it is saying I am a number, but I am of object type. And because I am of objects type, so I have a lot of functions, which is related to the function, which is related for the number, right? So I have the function, but it is related to the function. Make sense? Same concept is here. If I do f dot, that is the magic. When I do f dot on runtime, it will convert this primitive into the object type. That's why I'm saying everything is an object. That's an illusion. There is a primitive. It's saying everything is an object for us. Make sense? I hope so. Everyone understand this concept. It means whenever we write some variable which is a normal variable, which is a primitive type, but when you put a dot, it will behave like an object on runtime. Right? That's the beauty of this. So there is no need to learn this new number kind of stuff, because anyway, if you define f and when you do dot, it will internally does this thing. It will cast it internally. Right? So it is doing this auto casting automatically. I hope, guys, if anyone asks to you this what are sort of the reference type which hold the address. Remember this thing, which hold the address. So square bracket, curly bracket, string, boolean, number, all comes in the under the reference type. Make sense? So somebody asks, then why create an object? Just use number. Yes, definitely. We use a number. It is basically they are just making a sense. They are just doing. They just want to convey this message. We have created for you. We have created for you. Don't worry. You do not need to create. But if you want to create, we have an option. So if you want to find out how this thing behave internally, so you can find it out by using a new number. And when you use a normal variable and you use dot, so you understand behind the scene it is doing the auto boxing. It is doing the auto boxing. Make sense? So Chetan is asking something. Chetan has good question. Chetan is asking what is E. So if you see Chetan, E is number, right? 100. But if you compare with an F, you will see it's just 100. So it seems like when I most of the time when I'm creating this diagram, you always see I create a box and then I put the value inside it. So that's why this box is an object. So the same behavior is here. They put value inside this box, right? And then this address, whatever the address is coming, it is get assigned, right? Now the point is, if I do operation on an object, what will happen? If I do any operation on an object, what will happen? So if I try to do E++, right? When I do E++, so it will do the increment, right? And when it is doing increment, you will see it is actually typecast object into primitive type. It will typecast object into the primitive type because object has a reference. So it need to fetch the value, cast it into the primitive, then do the increment, and then it give a result. So if you check now type of E, now it is a number. Make sense? I hope, Chetan, I answer your question. What it does when you do the operation, it has become a normal type. Right. So Vikas is saying, so variable is neither a function nor an object. No. We can say a variable can store a reference, can store a value. It depends what you want to store. So if you want to store like f equal to 100, so it store a variable. It store a value. When you do a new number, it means it store the reference, right? Prapti is asking, please repeat what I need to repeat. Prapti, can you write specifically what you not understand? I hope guys, E variable you will not understand. So when we define E equals to new number, it is actually we are creating an object. So if you heard about this word new, it is in a C++, it is in Java. So this is used to create it is used to allocate a memory. I use a word, it is allocate a memory. If you not belongs to C++, so it is more like malloc in C, right? So it is creating a memory for whom? For number. Number is a function. And this function is behave like a class. It behave like a class. So it will create an object for us. So it create a 100 and wrap everything in an object. Right. So this round bracket is this round circle is an object, and it has some reference. It has some reference, and this reference is assigned to E. That's why I'm saying E is a reference variable. And because it's a reference variable, and because it's coming from the number, so number has so many functions. Number has so many functions because it behave like a class for us. So when I do E dot means 88 dot, and we have list of functions. So when I'm showing this thing here, when I'm writing here E dot, you will see there are plenty of functions are coming up, right? And even if you're using this thing, right? If you're using this thing, so if the behavior is E is having the 1000, but it is wrapped under a number. So it's, if you see the diagram, it is 100 is wrapped inside an object. Makes sense? And you can check it out by type of E. So it is saying I'm an object, right? It's an object. Makes sense? And when you do E equals to 1000, now it is, if you just print it, it is no longer in this box. It's no longer in this box. When you check type of E, it's just a numeric number. Makes sense? So that's the difference. One is used to create an object, one is just to store a value. That's why I'm using a word called primitive versus reference, right? So when you use a number capital with a new, it's become a reference. When you assign direct value, it has become a primitive. And primitive is required absolutely when you want to do the operations. So plus, minus, multiplication, division, everything is done on a primitive. I hope, Prapti, I answer your question. Aditya is asking, it is required to put a semicolon to terminate every statement. Is it optional? Yes, of course it is optional, but it is a good practice to put a semicolon. Why so? Because because right now we are on interpreter. That's a good part, because interpreter, whenever you are on interpreter, you press enter and that line is executed. That line is executed. It means it is running line by line. So that moment of time, semicolon is entirely optional. But when you're writing a code, so when you're writing a code, so it means you are writing bunch of lines, right, one after another. So if you put semicolon, so it make a signal to the internal compiler saying that this semicolon says the line is get terminated. But if you not put semicolon, so JavaScript says it is a continuation line. Makes sense? It is a continuation line. So if you forget to put a semicolon, it would not be any error. So it is saying, it seems like it is a line continuation. If it is a line continuation, if you're not putting a semicolon, so it means this entire line, this entire 3 lines is executed in a one step. It is executed in a one step. So for example, if the third line is dependent on these 2 lines, it will generate an error because it is treated as a one line. I hope I answer your question. So it is optional to not to put semicolon, but it is required when you want to differentiate. This line must be executed before this third line, right? So if you want to run the second and first line before this, then you need to put a semicolon. Make sense? Right. Shweta is asking, E is when you're doing E equal to new number, remember always 100 is inside the object. If it is inside the object, you have an address. So E have only address. That's why I'm saying it's an reference type. So if you just see it here, you will see in this example, it is saying in a curly bracket, it is showing your number 1000 is inside the curly bracket. Makes sense? So that's why it is E having a reference, and reference has the value. But if you specify like this, so now it has the value. So E has the value in this moment. Make sense? So that's why there is a difference between primitive and reference type. I hope you understand this thing. Okay. So Divyansh is asking scroll up. So I will scroll up this thing. Yes, Divyansh, I scroll it. From here we started.
Thank you, sir.
Okay. All right, guys. So this code is also going to be shared with all of you. So we are moving to the next thing. We understand there is a difference between a primitive and reference type. I'm moving to one more type I want to introduce, that is a function. So the point is how you can create a function. It is much easier how to create a function. You need to just write the word called function. It is like this. You write a function and then you write a function like show. That's it. Your function is created. So now no more like in C language, if you create a function, you need to specify void. You need to specify what type of parameter it is going to take. Nothing else. It is just a function keyword and then the function name. That's it. So now the question is, what function is going to be written? By default, undefined, because if you not specify any value, it is giving undefined. If you want to return, so you can return anything, right? Because it's a loosey type nature. So we will actually using this feature loosey typed today. So function show we have right now. And from here, I want to print something, right? We want to print something. So there is a predefined object that is called console. There is a predefined object that is called console. Think like cout and printf. So it is more like your cout and printf. So there is a console.log, and here I am saying I am show. So I'm typing I am show. So when you're writing function show console.log I am show, so it is going to print I am show, right? Now the point number 1, when you're writing a function, because you are writing multi-line code, so do not press enter. Remember, when you're writing a multi-line code, do not press enter, press shift enter. So shift enter allow you to write in a multi-line form, right? And when you're sure you don't want to write anything, then press enter. So remember, enter is for single line code execution. Shift enter is for multi-line you want to write, and then once you're sure, then you want to execute the code, then press enter like I am pressing it. So now I have a function. So it means we have something called type of show. So if we check type of show, so it means we have created a function. So we can say there is another data type called show. Function. So I have another data type called function, right? And this thing function, I can call it by using this show. And I call it, you will see I am show is coming. I am show is coming. Console.log says I am show is coming, but it is not returning anything, so it is giving undefined. Makes sense? So the pointer number one is console.log is used to print on a console, and if your function is not going to return anything, so it is giving undefined. I hope guys this thing is clear. Now there is a one more thing that I want to share. For if you create a variable like variable g, if I create, so I can do this thing also. So remember this thing. When I do var g equals to show, so it means I am assigning a function. Remember this point. I am assigning a function to the g. I am not calling a function, because if I am calling it, calling is look like this. It's a bracket. So it means I am calling it, but I am not calling it. I'm doing what? I am just assigning a function. So it means in the memory there would be a function. So because function has a lot of stuff, right? Function can have 500 lines, 1000 lines, 100 lines, whatever. So when you create a function, I'm just writing in a shortcut form. So function and function show. So I'm just writing in a pseudocode style. So when you create some function with some code, so this function would be on some memory location. That function would be on some memory location. Let's say 66, right? So what I'm doing, this 66, I'm assigning to g. So g is a reference variable. Now this time it's not holding an object reference. It is holding a function reference. That is a new thing for you. So it means you are holding a function reference. Now this is possible. That is the beauty of this programming. Now your show containing a function, and function is on some memory reference. So I am assigning a memory reference and it is stored in a g variable, right? So now it's time to check it out. So from here, I just clear this thing, and we will see here when I press enter, you will see g has what? G has entire function. If you see, g has entire function, right? And if you check type of g, so it means you assign a function, right? So now type of g is a function. So can I write this thing? Because g has a reference of it, so I can write this thing. Okay, it reference type can hold also the thing called function, and we can assign a function reference. I hope guys this thing is clear to all of you, right? So now the point is a variable can hold a function reference. So can I do this thing? Of course. So I am able to call I am show by using g. So the point number one is now your variable can hold a function reference. And if variable, you need to understand, if your variable can hold a function, you already know a variable can be written from a function, right? So listen carefully. I am saying your function can have variable can be written. Function can have variable can be written. Now variable can have function. Variable can store function like this. Your variable is now capable to store a function. So now if you return a variable, so it means you are returning a function. So you can return a function. So that is possible. We will see this thing. But the point number one is your variable is capable to store a function, and now you can return a variable. It means indirectly you are returning a function. You can pass a variable into another function. You already know this thing in a C language, but now your variable can hold a function. So you can pass a function within a function. You can pass a function within a function. That's the beauty of this programming. We will go in more detail on this, but this is just a kickstart. We understand there is another type called function. So we just cover up the data types. What they have provided, we understand. I hope guys this makes sense to everyone. So I'm just taking the questions as well as. So Nitish is asking, isn't hard to code in console if we need to press enter? Of course, but it is easy to understand code. Right now we are going to understand the thing, because whatever you will write, you will see. But if I am write everything on editor and you are just a beginner, it is very hard to understand everything. That's why if you see, the good part of this console is you write and you will see, right? It means if you are going to plan to write 100 line of code, so you will write 5 lines, run it, test it perfectly fine, then paste it on your editor. So it means your code is, whenever you're writing your code is writing and plus testing. Makes sense? But if you're writing 100 lines of code and then you run it, and you will get a surprise of 50 lines of error, then you need to fix it, everything. Makes sense? So that's the beauty of this. So that's why we are writing, we are practicing on this consoles, because we are very beginner, and because we are very beginner, so we learn by line. And once we know every line, as a coder, if I know every line, every essence of the line. So it means I'm able to build a lot of good things, right? That's why we are practicing on this. So instead of taking the pain of just 2 keys, enter and shift, I think it must be clear your doubts if you're running it here instead of writing everything on some editor. So I'm moving to something called Abhishek question, that is function show written 5 plus 5. Show, this is correct or not? Yes, of course it is correct. So if you are writing function show and return 5 plus 5, of course, and when you do console.log, so show is going to return something and you have 10 value, right? You have 10 value. I hope, Abhishek, this thing is clear. And now how we can print a variable value in console.log? Of course, you can print it. So you need to just specify G1000 and console.log, and then you specify G1. That's it. You will have the value. I hope, Swati, I answer your question. Why we are not using document.write? Nitin, why we are not using document.write? Because right now we are not learning DOM. We are not learning DOM. So when we learn the DOM, then we will go for it. So it means when we integrate our application with the HTML, when we want to see the output on HTML, but right now we are learning what? We are learning the basic stuff, right? If you know the basic stuff, then you're able to build some application which is integrated with HTML and CSS, right? So that's why we are doing the baby steps, and that is must thing. If you know the baby step, then you are able to run, right? I hope, Nitin, this thing is clear. G is calling the variable. G is calling the variable. Yep. G is a variable which is holding a function reference. And when you do G bracket, so it is having the reference of that function. So it will reach it and then call it. I hope, Chetan, this is clear. Okay, now where H equals to show, if you do this thing, so it means show has nothing. If you just see show has nothing, so by default is giving undefined. So if you try this thing, where H equals to show, because you're calling it, right? Show, if you just see, show does not return anything. So it is returning undefined. And it is giving undefined. So if you just see, I am show is coming up. If you're going to print H, you will see undefined is coming, right? Because it does not return anything. That's why undefined is there. I hope, Aditya, this is clear. Can a variable be called an alias of function name? Definitely, you can call. You can call in an English form. G is an alias name of show, right? Or you can also say G is a reference variable, right? So G is a reference, right? Shagun is asking G is a reference. So it's a reference, so you can call it, right? It doesn't matter. G dot isn't necessary. For if it is an object, then G dot is necessary because it has the function type. So you call it with a bracket. Makes sense? Because if you check type of G, it's not an object. So you cannot use dot. It's a function type. So that's why you need a bracket. I hope I answer your question. That is Shagun, right? And I'm moving to the Priyanka question. When we use function is compulsory to write console.log. It is basically, Priyanka, when you want to see some output on console, see some output on the console, then you need to write console.log. So console.log is basically for the developer. When you are developing some website, for example, if I just give you a glance like flipkart.com, if you just go here. So Flipkart has this GUI stuff, right? So this is the GUI stuff of Flipkart. That is for the end user. But if you do right click and if you go inspect and you go console, so you will see, I think they omit something. This one, Flipkart Love Web. That is written by some developer, console.log, right? Service worker registration successfully. It is written by a developer, right? So developer has written this thing just to ensure my website is working fine, right? So that's why console.log is especially for the developer. So now you know this, so you can do right click and inspect and see the logs, right? I hope, Priyanka, console.log, you understand. So it is just for developer logs. Okay, now moving to the next question. Shweta is asking console.log, I am show and console.log. I just click on the see more. So Shweta is asking E equals to 5. So Shweta, I already told you in a previous session that when you define E equals to 5, so if you not define var, it has become a global variable, right? If you do not have any var kind of stuff. So it has become a global variable and it is accessible. And when you print console.log, E is having 5, right? So when you print it, E is coming as a 5 and it's a correct code. But technically saying it's a global, so it is dangerous one. Makes sense? So go back to this. Now I'm moving to the Swati question, how we can print a variable value in console.log. I already told you, if you want to print this stuff, so you need to just write console.log and print it. Just like this, console.log and G1, and this will be get printed. And can reference a variable to another variable? Definitely. A reference variable is having an address. It's like a pointer, so you can hand it over to any another variable. So for example, you have a reference variable where array, and you have 10, 20, 30. So you know this is array contain a reference of this 10, 20, 30 location. So if you do ARR2 and then you do ARR, so it means the array ARR address is assigned to ARR2, right? So if it is get assigned to ARR2, so now the point is both of them are pointing to the same memory. So it would be like this. The memory is get created. Here it has this thing 10, 20 and 30, and it has some address like 88. So ARR has this 88, and now 88 is assigned to ARR2. So ARR2 having 88, so both of them is pointing to the same location. If both of them is going to point to the same location, if any one is going to change anything, so it will show the changes on the both of them. It means array and array2 effect for the both of the change, right? Because both have the same address, right? So if I do, let's say if I do ARR2 and I say go to the 0th place and put 1000 or 10,000 instead of 10, so you will see ARR2 has this thing, even ARR has this thing. Makes sense? Because both are pointing to the same memory address. So Nitesh, I hope I answered your question. What is console here? Console means this output screen is called the console, Ayush. So there is a console, and log means you are logging something. Make sense? So when you write console, so where you are writing a console, I think what Shweta is saying, actually, sir, it is showing error. What is showing error? Console is showing error or something else? So can you brief it out? So Dhruv is asking what is VM? Of course, that's a very good question, Dhruv. So when you're using what is VM, because when your Chrome is running, I told you Chrome is running under the thing called V8. So if we just go in more detail to understand this thing, for if you understand from today itself, before today, you know Chrome is a browser, right? But from today onwards, you know Chrome is something, it has the internal mechanism that is called V8. V8 is an engine for us which understands JavaScript and interpret JavaScript into some C++ level thing, which is understood by machine, right? So when it does the interpretation line by line, so it uses something called VM. VM is virtual machine. If anyone is coming from the Java background, so Java has JVM. Same here, it has the virtual machine, and this virtual machine is helping out to do the interpretation. So that's why there is coming a VM. So it means whatever the line you are writing, it is handed over to this interpreter, and interpreter internally using the VM. That's why the VM is coming up. I hope, Dhruv, I answer your question. Why the VM is coming up?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Sunil is asking the same thing, so I already answered. If you assign a function to a global variable, then the function also become global? No. A function is never be global. Reference, it has the reference of it, right? So that variable, particular variable is become global, right? So E equals to 5, but it is showing E as output. Where it is, E is 5. I think in your code, can you saying E is 5, this is, and it is showing 5. Of course it is showing 5, because whenever you write something, so this thing is important for all of you. When you're writing this thing here, right? So think like it is like a mouth, right? It is like a mouth. So this mouth is called input mouth, and this mouth is called output mouth, right? So whenever you input something to the system, it will give an output. So you type E5, so it has the value of 5, so that's why it is giving output, right? So that's a behavior of shell, because whatever the code you are writing on a shell, right? So this is called shell, guys, this entire window. is called shell, and you're writing everything on a shell. So when you define a variable, so it means you take an input. So it means when you do an input, so you're inputting the value to the variable. So it never give an output. That's why it is coming undefined. So when there is no output, it is coming undefined. When there is an output, it is printing this thing. Right. I hope Shweta, I answered your question. So Bunty is asking console.log, document.write. Right now, console.log is used to print here. That is for the developer console. That's a developer console. It means console.log is entirely for the developer stuff. But when you talk about something called document.write, it is for writing on this side, right? This is called document, right? So we will go in more detail on a document, but it is not a right time because we learn the DOM later on when we integrate with it. So I just give you a glance. When you write something document, you will understand this document. This whole screen is get blue, right? So if you guys see this area, and when I place a cursor on the code window and I'm writing document, you will see when I'm writing a document, the entire screen is get blue. So when you write document.write and you write hello.js inside this, so it will actually write in the document side, right? So it will write it here. Makes sense? So console.log is for the developer perspective, and document.write is basically for end user perspective. I hope Bunty, I answered your question. So we will see the DOM part, then we understand. Rahul saying, can we have the address of the reference? No, it doesn't provide, but there are some libraries through this you can get, right? It's a low level library. So somehow we don't need this because it does not expose any pointer kind of concept. If any variable is inside the function, is it global? No, it is global when you do not use var, right? So Nitin, if you not use var inside a function, so for example, the dangerous part is this: when you create a function like this, like test I created, and now dangerous part is this. If I does this thing, now this variable and r is become global. So this has become global, right? So when it does this thing, and I'm going to print console.log I am r comma r, right? So I want to print this r value, and I just call this thing test. I call it. So it is saying r is there. Now after this, if I am able to access, yes, I'm able to access. That is the issue. So the pointer is when you create a function and without var, if you define with a variable, it has become a global. Makes sense? So where we are, if any variable is inside the function is global, is it clear? Can you repeat this array part? Because we just started, we are just define the how to define an array. So Devesh, we just only learn how to define it, right? Okay, it is now needed. Nift is saying which software are you using to writing on screen? This is ink tool. So I'm using an ink tool. Through ink tool I'm writing it. So we will search about blank in only Chrome or either any browser. Priyanka, you can type any browser about blank and enter it. So you need to make sure you just go on a tab and then you need to type about blank. So there is no need of search. So when you type it, you will go on a blank page, right? So I take care of all these questions, guys. I hope this thing is clear to everyone right now. Now, what we understand these stuff. I mean, we understand how to distinguish everything, primitive reference. We figure out everything. We understand how to create a function. Now we are moving more on a function side because we are just started a function. So we are just going depth in a function, right? So take a dive in a function and we understand some of the best part, right? So the best part which I want to show you in a function, that is, it's a loosey type nature, because I told you it's a loosey type programming. Loosey type means like we have a variable and we can assign any variable on it. So it would be like a more or a dynamic side. It means your variable is of dynamic type. It means whatever the value you can assign it. So it's more like when you define this thing, it is okay. And when you define this thing, it is also okay, right? So it means it will override it. And when you check last value, it has become an object, and you know it is an object of array. So that's the beauty of this. That's why it is we can say JavaScript is a dynamically typed language. Can we say this word? It's a dynamically typed language, where C is not. C is a statically typed language. C++ is a statically typed language. Java is a statically typed language. I hope, guys, this makes sense. So it's a dynamically typed language. It means on a runtime, the variable is get changed. So that's the best part of this. Plus, when you create a function, because it's a dynamically typed as well as it's a loosely typed. So when you create a function, for example, I'm going to create a function called add. Suppose this is my function, and suppose I'm saying console.log, and I'm just saying I am add. Right, I'm saying this thing, and from here I will say, I think Priyanka, you're writing, the page is not open. I hope you're writing on a tab about colon blank, not on a Google search. Otherwise, it would not open. And which browser you're using? So when I'm writing function add and I'm writing console.log, so I create a function and type of add answer this thing, right? So I will even open a Firefox, so I will answer. So type of add saying I am a function, right? So we create a function, right? I'm also showing you if someone is using this stuff. So I will write about colon blank. Oops, it is not. This thing, I hope it's a blank thing, right? It's a blank thing for us. So it is not explicitly writing this thing. And I do inspect and I go to the console section. So this is a console section. So from here you are able to write every stuff, right? So this is the way out. So it will not showing about blank. It will just showing you a blank tab. That is the GUI part of this. I hope this is clear. Okay, now we are here. Type of add, and it is showing add as a function. Now, if I call like add like this, it is okay for us. And if I call it like this, it is also okay. If I call it like this, Amit, and I call it like this, true 10, still it call. So the point number one is, when you define a function, the arguments are optional. The arguments are optional. You can pass anything on a function. That's the beauty of this. If any one of you learn C++ or Java, you learn something called function overloading. If anyone asks to you in JavaScript, do you have function overloading? So your answer is no. There is no function overloading, and we don't need it. Why we don't need it? Because the functions are very loose. Function can take any argument, n arguments of any type. That's the beauty. Any arguments of n type. Make sense, guys? I hope, guys, this thing is clear, how the function is get created. Now, the fundamental rule is, when you create a function, when you create this kind of function, like add Amit 90, why we need this kind of functions, right? Abhishek is showing some error. I just check out Abhishek error. Console.log R is not defined. So I hope you're writing not on a Chrome. You're writing on something else, I think, Abhishek. Is it? I hope you're writing on some other browser. Are you writing on Chrome? So it means you are not, somebody says you have not run function first. So Rohan is saying, I think function calling is missing. Show you have not called. Right. So you just call the function and then print your variable. You will get the value. Right. I hope this is clear, because you just define a function. So that variable is not in the memory. All right, guys. So one more thing, because one more thing I want to highlight in this section. If you are using some, that's why I'm asking he is running on a Chrome or not, because there is a thing called use strict. If you use this thing but not in Chrome, you will write it on your some VS Code somewhere. So we use strict. When you use strict, right, so it would not allow you to define the global variables, right? So it would be on a strict mode, right? That's why I'm asking to the Abhishek where you're writing it. Make sense, guys? There is a use strict. So we are going to use strict when we are on a VS Code. So we can make our programming little bit strict. Now the point is, when we create a function and this function is whole sole responsible to take any argument, can we utilize this thing? Yes, we can utilize this thing. So it means If I'm passing n arguments, what is the benefit of this? Right. So Bunty is asking, can you give an example where we pass the actual parameter? Definitely, we will going to see. So Abhishek asking, strict use strict is basically like if we not use a var variable and we define a variable and it has become a global variable, it is dangerous. So if we use in a VS code, when we are on a VS code, so we will use something called use strict on top of our JS. So on top of our JS, if we write this thing, so it would have some strict rule. So it will say you need to define a variable with a var, otherwise I would not run. Makes sense? So there we will use it, but not in the Chrome, right? So when we are writing a JS files, then we will write this thing. I hope I answered your question. Now we are going to see how we can use this add function, which is able to take any argument, right? Which is able to take any argument. So I'm interested to create a function which can add anything, So I will say, just think about this thing. How all of you guys going to write this code? I'm just writing. Just spend 5 minutes on this. Create a function called add. Right. Create a function called add. Right. So Paras, yes, definitely it will work on a Chrome, but I am saying you need to specify it in some editor, because when you create a JS file, then you need to specify it. But on, like, we are doing the open coding on a Chrome, that moment of time it would not work, but it will work when you are loading a JS, right? So later on we will see whatever the code we are writing in some .js file. That moment of time we will specify on top of JS use strict. So that JS has become strict. I hope I answered your question, Paras. So when I create a function add here, I want add n number, right? I want to add a number, right? So think about, I want to add like 10, 20, 30, 40, 50. This would be possible. I need to create a function. So whatever the programming you have learned, either C or either C++ or either Java or either Python, whatever you have learned, just think about how you will create it. So I'm saying I have 2 arguments. I'm saying I have might be 4 arguments. I have might be 0 arguments. So if I have 0 arguments, so the result would be 0, right? If I have 2 arguments, so let's say the result would be 30, right? If I have this, so it would be 100. If I have this, the result would be 150, right? If I have, suppose if I have the argument called 10, 10 like this, right? One is string, one is this thing, so the result would be 20. If I have passed 10 and I pass ten, which does not make any sense, so the result would be 10, right? If I pass add and then I say I am passing a 10 and 10 and then 10, so the result would be 30. And if I am passing a function 10 and then suppose I am passing a function, think about, I am passing a function and that function says 10 and that is the bracket, and it returned 10, suppose it returned 10, and here I am passing 10 then 10, 10 and then 10, right? So it will give a result 30. Make sense? So we want to create this kind of function which is saying I can add any number, right? So we want to make it a function who is responsible to add string with numeric. You know how to do it. Yashraj is asking, would it concate? We already know, but we know how to make it the addition. Remember the function, that is %. So I want to create a function who is responsible to add everything. I mean numeric n range, right? It's an n range, and without arguments it will say 0. It would be string with numeric. It would be tn10. It would be the string one, or it would be a function, right? So ten, this time this tn is a function, right? Think about it in any programming, how you can write and how much code you are going to write or how many functions you are going to create. Think about it. Just spend 5 minutes of time just to think about it. how you will solve this problem either in a C++ or either in Java or any programming you have learned in your college time, any programming. Then we will see how we'll solve this problem in a JavaScript. Think about it. And also share your thoughts on chat window. If somebody find out, I can do it in this way, either in C++ or either in Java or either in any other programming. So Nidhi is saying by passing array to its function, by adding to its elements in the function, but in which programming, Sunidhi, you are talking about? Mohammed Sam is saying varargs perfectly. I think you understand in Java. Java has something called varargs. We can do this in Python using star args. Yes. In Java, it's a varargs. Yes, varargs. But problem is in varargs you need to specify some type. In varargs you need to specify some type, right? So what is your type? That is my question. Varargs is for variable arguments. So what is your type for this? Ritik, I am not going to convey in a C language because I learn C language in a college time only. Right. So I am saying we create this kind of function and I'm just giving you, hand it over to you just to think of, if you know C or C++ or any programming, what are the challenges you will face or how much line of code you are going to write. Akshat, if you are using an array, so the array of let's say of object type. Now there is a problem. If it is array of object type, so it means I think you are talking about in terms of Java, right? So the problem what you are facing, Akshat, that is how you can pass a function, because that object is going to take object. It never be going to take a function. Make sense? Nipun is saying we have to use functional overloading, but how many? I mean, Nipun, if you're going to do functional overloading, so how many overloading? Because we don't know, we really don't know what is the order of it. Because somehow it would be this also. Right. It would be this also. It would be like this. It would be like this, right? Then 10 is a function, then this, then this. So it would be more dangerous. Single is saying array dot from a for each. Please do not Google it. If you know, then please answer. Right. By using default parameters for setting some default things. ठीक है. So अभी के लिए मैं for each word नहीं use करूँगा because it's something is for the callback thing, right? It's something for the callback thing. That's why I'm not using it. क्योंकि अभी तक हमें पता ही नहीं what is actually the callback. So by using default parameter is just a fixed thing, Dhananjay. It means default parameter says this is the default thing. So it would not work for everything because we want to make a generic function. Kushal is saying %, for every incoming value. If I do %, for every incoming value, what will happen with an array? What will happen with a function? It will give an AN. Right. We have pass multiple arguments for every function. How many arguments, Dhruv? If we are going to pass multiple arguments, it means how many? So it means we need to create a lot of functions. Right. So subwith is also a default argument we cannot use. I hope, guys. But this, if we just see, this problem is much more like complex problem. It means how we can create this thing. So many suggestions are coming. Somebody says vararg, somebody says objects array, somebody says array dot from something, somebody says, like Himanshi is saying templates is not an easy thing. So template of varargs, Himanshi, if you want to use it. So again, it is pretty much complex because we are thinking about the strict programming language, right? But that's a beauty of this programming, which is not strict because it does not have any data type. So what they provided something. I'm just showing you that is much important thing, which is coming up. There is something called, we have created add, right? This is a function, right? We have created this add function, but behind the scene, there is something happen behind the scene with this add. Think like this scenario, like we born in India, so we have a color, we have height based on the environment of India. But for example, if we all born in Africa, right, so we have the different color, we have the different hairstyle, right? So we have different body structure. So the pointer is, it's entirely depends on the environment. So now we are running the JavaScript in some environment, that is a V8, right? There is a V8 environment, we are running it here. So the pointer is, when we are running the JavaScript in their environment, that environment affect the function. It means when you are running, you are programming in Java has different environment. For Java, you install JDK. When you're running on a C or C++, you need a Turbo C or Borderland C, right? So you have different environment. So that environment support you, right? Same here. JavaScript has environment, that environment support JavaScript. What they support, I am just going to show you. So I'm just going to dig the things. It means how internally what they does internally. So we are going in deep. By using this thing, console.dir. So console.dir, if you heard about the word called dir command is to show the directories, right? Inside directories. Same here, when you write console.dir and you put add inside, so it will show the internal structure of add. That's important thing. It will show the internal structure of the add. So when you run this thing, you are able to see it has a function add, which we have created, nothing special. But when we open it, we will see a lot of stuff. From where this lot of stuff is coming, this is because of the environment. Like I take an example. If we are in Africa, our color is get change. Why it is get change? Because it affect by the environment. Same here, when we create a function, environment add these things. So Priyanka, I am saying, when you create a function, environment adds some properties automatically. So when we do console.dir, so it means we are seeing what the environment effect, right? So that's why we are writing dir. Dir is a function which is inside a console, and when you write dir and you pass your function, so it will show the internal skeleton of it. Make sense? Internal skeleton of this. So think like when we see each other, so we will see the skin element, right? We are not able to see the skeleton, but when we do the X-ray, we will see the skeleton. So dir is actually doing this X-ray, right? So that's why it is giving the X-ray of it. So add X-ray we are able to see, and this X-ray says you have the arguments, you have the color, you have the length, you have the name, you have the prototype, lot of stuff. And you will see the amazingly, you see the thing constructor. Oh my god, it means it has something called object, right? So it means somebody asked in a previous session why when I'm checking instance of function, it is not coming. So that's why, because a function has something called object internally, it has, right? We will see later on. But right now the important thing is arguments. So argument says I am the whole soul responsible to take the arguments. So whatever the argument you will pass, it is handed over to the thing called arguments. Make sense, guys? So we'll touch every stuff one after the another, but we start with the arguments. So I hope, Priyanka, this is clear. The dir is used to see the X-ray of your function. So if you go internally, you use console.dir. Make sense? Right. So Chetan is saying the console.dir will show the structure of add function, right? So now the pointer is, we are here. Now we are on this add function. We are able to see the structure of it. Vikas is sharing some code. So Vikas is understanding because we have the argument, so we can loop it, right? But this is only the one answer, Vikas, because you are able to access only the some part. But we have so many things. We have strings, because if we just go through it, we have the string. So right, good. So Vikas is working on it parallelly, very good. So now the point is, we have the function, and from here we need to take everything with an argument. So I'm just going step by step. I'm just going here. We are able to see it has the arguments because we already know internally we have seen there is an arguments. So if I'm doing argument dot length, so it makes sense, right? Because argument is like an array. So if we pass add like this, so we are passing first argument, that's Amit. Second argument is 90, 100. That's the second argument. Third argument is true, and fourth argument is 10. So what would be the length is coming up? The length is coming up 4. Make sense? So now we know there are arguments, right? So fundamentally, we have internally the thing called arguments. So Prapti is asking argument.length. So Prapti, if you just see this thing, that is when we do console.dir, we have the function add, and add has the arguments. And arguments are because you have plenty of arguments. So behind the scene, it is like an array. That's why I'm using a word. It is like an array. It's not an array. It is like an array, right? So it is like an array. So it will pick everything. An array, because it's like an array, so it has something called length. So through length, you can identify how many arguments are coming up. So it means you have the 4 arguments which is coming up. I hope this makes sense. What is the use of the length? Right. So because I am just taking up, you just try it, and now when we are on the same page, so you can compare your code, and you will get the answer. So the point is, we have the function add, we have this arguments dot length. We are able to see how many arguments are passing. So it means, can we loop this? Can we loop this thing? So it would be easy for us. So if I do function add, and I am saying for where I equals to 0 and I less than arguments dot length. So that's a first basic code, and I++. So if I do this thing, so I'm using a word called var, right? So this is a time to understand the difference between var and let. When I use a word called var does a thing internally. When I use a word called var does this thing. When you define a var, it would be automatically declare here, because var has a function level scope. Always remember this thing. Var has always a function level scope. It never be defined inside a block. So it has the function level scope. I hope guys this makes sense. So you are defining the var inside a for loop. It does not have the block level scope. That's why if I use var, so it is actually declared here. So we can see, is it correct or not, right? So I am writing here var I equals to 0, I less than arguments dot length, and I++. So it means I am actually traversing the arguments. Make sense? So Bhavya is saying, can we access each element of argument as arguments? Yes, definitely we are accessing, but we actually, Bhavya, we don't know how many arguments you are going to receive, right? So we really don't know how many arguments you are going to receive. So that's why I need to traverse it. So it would be 10, it would be 20, it would be 30. That's why I'm doing the looping, right? Behind the scene, I'm doing this argument of I. So the pointer is var I equals to, I hope everyone understand the concept of the var. So the fundamental rule is now, because var is always a function level. So the behind the scene is when you write console.log and you are try to print I is comma I, you will print I and it is coming as undefined. It is coming as undefined. Makes sense? Because when you define var I equals to 0, by default it has a function level scope, so it will define this variable here, and because it does not have the value this moment of time, so it has the value called undefined by default. But the pointer is it is get defined here. So always remember, your var variable is always host. The word is called always host. So there is a word called on internet, if you search it out, most of the interview asking this question, variable hosting. Variable hosting. So your variable is host when you define a variable inside a block, and it is always go on a top level. It means it is always go on a function level. When it is go on a function level, by default its value is undefined, but it just ensure you your variable is declared, but it is not assigned a value. That's why it is coming undefined. When it is reached here, then the 0 is get assigned. Make sense? So it means it is also available after this for loop. It is also available after this for loop, right? So if you are writing a var, so you are cheating with yourself. It means you define a var, but it has a scope on a function level. So that's why there is something called let. So if you use a let, so let has block level scope. So ECMA 6, like ECMA 2020 is coming on to 2020, ECMA 6 is coming on 2015. So from ECMA 6 onwards, they have created something called let. They have something created called let. So Single is asking something, that is where is basically, so we understand in a very basic fundamental style. So I will run, then you will clearly understand this thing, right? So pointer is when you define where I, just remember the one thing, your variable is host. Host means it will always get declared on this line, right? From where the function is get started. From here it is start declaring. So bottom line is you are writing here where, but it is internally doing this stuff. It is doing this stuff. Make sense? If it is doing this stuff, you already know, because you not assign anything, it is undefined. It is undefined. So when you print it, it is undefined. So where is internally get omitted, where is internally get omitted, and when you do I equals to 0, so it is get initialized. So from here it is get initialized, but declare it here. That's why this term is called variable hosting. I hope Lakshay is understand this thing, Single is understand this thing, and we are going to test this thing. Is this really happens? So we will run this thing. So just to understand this thing, I am here writing console.log and I am writing I is comma I. Make sense? So the fundamental rule is when you run this thing, I is coming undefined, but here when you run it, I has some value. So it has the value, whatever the value is, because when you loop it, it is start with 0 and it will reach to the argument dot length. So it means if the length is 3, so it will I is coming 3. So let's try it out this thing. So when I run add and I do 1020, so I'm passing 2 arguments. So we will see what is the I value. I is coming undefined, makes sense. And then I is coming what? I is coming 2, right? And I is become 2 because it is iterate twice, because we have 2 arguments. I hope guys this makes sense. So it means when you're writing a where inside a loop, that's why I'm saying you're cheating yourself, because where is always on a function level scope. So if you want something on a local scope, you want something a block level scope, recommendation is always use let. Always use let, right? So that's a just basic difference, but there is a huge difference between these two. But because we are just a beginner, for a beginner level, this is the correct thing we have learned right now. And from here, if I don't want this thing, so I specify let. When I specify let, it means the scope of this variable is limited to the for loop. After for loop, it cannot be accessed. Remember this thing. After for loop, it never be accessed. Right now, what is the thing? Now, if you run this thing, it will, because you have the let, it will generate a reference error. So it will say this variable is not there, so it will generate a reference error. So if I run this stuff, and I'm running it with a 2 argument, so you will see it is giving a reference error. Makes sense, guys? So because let says my scope start from here, I am not define it on top level. So I'm not defining it on a top level. I'm not initializing with the undefined. Remember, I'm not initializing with the undefined. So if it is not initialized with the undefined, it has become a reference error. So that's the difference between. So the bottom line is where is for function level scope, let is for block level scope. That is the point you need to remember. Let is for the block level scope. Right. So Sen is asking this thing. Let only use within the for loop. Of course, it means if you have a block, if you have if, within a if you want to define some variable and you don't want to access outside the if, always use let. Do not use where. Right. Priyanka asking arguments.length. Argument.length says whatever the argument Priyanka you are passing, 1020 you are passing. So when you're passing this 1020, so this would be go inside this argument, because argument is behave like an array and length giving the array length. So you have 2 arguments, so it will give you 2. I hope Priyanka, I answered your question. Bhavya is asking explain the reference error. This is pretty much easy thing, because you define let has the block level scope, so you cannot refer outside it. Remember, you cannot refer. That's why it is called reference error. If you just think about the English word, so why the reference error say, it means you are not able to refer it because its scope is get limited. Now it is you only able to access within the for loop. You cannot access outside the for loop because let has a block level scope. So that's why if you try to access it, so it will give a reference error. I hope I answer your question, Bhavya. I answer your question, Rashpreet Kaur, right? Why the reference error is coming up. All right. So the conclusion part is, whenever anyone asks to you what is let, it's a block level scope. When anyone asks what is a var, it's a function level scope. And because it has a function level scope, so it would be get hosted. When it is get hosted, it declare a variable with undefined value. Remember this point. It declare a variable with undefined value. But when it is with a let, so it is just declare, but it not undefined. That's why the reference error is coming, right? So far we understand this let concept, and we know where we are going to use the let word, right? Now we are moving to the sum part. So for the summation, we are using here. I just commented out this thing, right? So I don't want to confuse you with multiple outputs. I just commented out this thing, and I'm saying where sum equals to 0. So I'm doing the sum, and from here I just write sum plus equals to arguments of I. Makes sense? So it will do the sum, and whatever the sum is coming up, I want to return it. So I'm saying return sum. So sum is get returned, and I am saying add 10, 20. So it is saying 30. Makes sense? I'm saying add nothing. It is saying 0. I'm saying add 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So it will do the sum. I hope, guys, this makes sense. So the first version, I mean this first version is working up. So till here we have done, right? So we have done till here, but we are not able to do this thing. Why? Because if I'm going to run this thing and I am saying double quote 7, so the problem is 1 plus 2 plus 3 plus 4 plus 5 plus 6 will be happen with a plus, but whatever the result of 1 to 6 is coming, it will be get concatenated with 7. So see the result. It is coming 21 till 1 to 6, right? And when the 7 is occurred, it is doing 217. Make sense? So 21 plus concate with a 7. So we don't want to do this stuff. So the answer is we need to use %. So if I use %, in an argument, right? If I use %, in an argument, so now the pointer is sum up, and the sum up is coming up. Make sense? I hope this thing is clear, guys. Now we have done with this stuff also. We are done with this stuff, right? This stuff is already taken care. Now the problem is, if this kind of value is coming up, TEN10 is coming up. Now how will take care of this? If TN is coming up, now I hope you know what is the problem will raise. When you do the TEN, so it is going to %. Yeah. So you need to understand, when you are specifying TEN, so it is going to %, and when the % is with a string, it will give a nan. It will give a nan. Make sense? So if we try this thing, %, with a 10, it will give nan. If it is giving a nan, and nan with some result, it is nan. Remember this thing. Nan with some result is just giving a nan. So the problem is, what we are going to face now, if I am writing 10, the end result is nan, right? It must sum up 1 to 6 and treat 10 as 0. See this thing? I am saying 10, 10. So this 10 must be treated as 0. So 10 plus 10, 0 it is coming up, right? I hope, guys, this makes sense. So how to tackle this thing, how to tackle this stuff? I will just go to the code, and from this %, I will put isNan on top of it, because I know might be there are chances it will give isNan. If it is giving isNan, I mean it will give a nan, so isNan give true. If it is true, so I am saying take it as a 0. Consider that value as 0 and then sum up. Otherwise do the %. Make sense? So otherwise you do this % stuff. So I just copy this stuff and paste it. I hope, guys, this makes sense. So % is giving nan, isNan is checking, is it true? Is it true? So just make it 0. Otherwise make it this thing. So Prapti, it is simple thing. When you're doing the % stuff, when you're doing this % stuff with a 10, you get nan, right? You get a nan, and whatever the result is coming up, let's say 28 is coming up, and you plus 28 with a nan, it is always nan. So the bottom line is you will get at the end nan. That's why when we run this thing 1 to 6 and TEN, and then you get a nan thing. Right? So I don't want to get a nan result. So that's why when I converted it, I put a precaution code. That precaution code says if the result is coming nan, so treat it that number as 0, right? So it will do the summation. Otherwise, do the %. So it means if it is not nan. I hope, Prapti, this is clear. Makes sense? So this is single has facing some issue. I'm just checking out. So when I am returning this sum, so this would be some sum is coming up, right? So Shweta, I am again repeating it. Nan, it is because we already learned the same stuff on a previous session. Nan is basically is coming up when you're doing this %, right? When you're doing the % t and 10, you will get a nan, right? Because % is responsible to convert a string, but that string must be in a numeric way. So if it is 10, it means it's a numeric 10, so it will convert it. But English 10, it cannot be converted. That's why it is nan. And if you do any operation with a nan, you will get a nan result. So the same thing we will facing. So 1 to 6 with a 10, it is actually doing what? It is doing the addition, and with 10 it is converted into the nan, and nan plus nan is nan. That's why we're getting this. So we don't want to get this thing. That's why we are doing is nan. Is nan, it is just a precaution code. We are just checking out if the result of this % is coming is nan, so treat it as a 0. Otherwise, do the %. I hope this makes sense. I answer your question. Can Bhavya is asking something? Can we create 10 as a variable and assign it to variable 10 and then pass in %? Can we then create 10 as a variable? So it means if you Bhavya, if you create 10 as a variable, so I think is you are trying to say this thing. If you try to say this thing, so this is just a variable name, but we are having a string and we really don't know the possibility of 10. It means somebody pass 1000 in English, 10,000 in English, 1001 in English. So we really don't know. So that's why I'm treating this thing, I'm treating this as a 0, right? If it is a non-numeric value. I hope, Bhavya, this is clear. So I'm taking the question of single is saying if I'm calling this thing, it is giving not the result. So I'm just checking out where result and add, right? And here I'm passing it. And let's say this value and this value. So the result would be 30 plus 20 plus 10, 50. I mean 60 result would become. So if you print result, this is the result. And either if you do console.log, this is the result, right? So if the result is not coming up, check your return where you put this, right? I hope, guys, this thing is clear to everyone. Now so far we understand how this is nan is working out. So we are able to figure out this thing as well. So we have done this stuff. We have done this stuff. We have done this stuff, right? We have done this stuff. Makes sense. Oops, this stuff is left, right? This stuff is saying, can I pass a function? Yes, of course, I can pass a function because we already know a variable can hold a reference of a function. A variable can hold a reference of a function, right? So it means if I create a function, let's suppose my function name is 10. And here I am returning 10. Makes sense? And I am trying to pass a function. Right? So the calling would be like add 10, and this calling is like this. ten, that's a string, and ten, that is what? That is a function. That is a function which I am trying to pass. So I'm not calling it. Remember, I'm not calling it. I am passing it because you already know this behave like a variable for us, so we can pass it. So we can pass this thing. Even you can pass it like this, where w equals to ten, right? So ten is a function reference, hold it into the w, and we are passing it, right? So we are passing it here. So your ten is passed here, or either the w is passed here. Makes sense, guys? And now I want to run this thing. So the pointer is 10 plus this 10, 30 would become. Now the problem start. When I'm doing this stuff, so this w is handed over to this thing. It is doing %. It is doing the % of this function. That is the problem. It is doing the % of this function, and this function having a reference, so it will convert it into is nan. If it is converted into isNaN, so it pick 0, so it would not pick 10. So the answer which will become, it is 20, right? So 10, 10, 20, and this 10 is a 0, and this W is also treated as a 0, but this W must be treated 10, right? That's a problem. I hope everyone understand this thing, because it will go inside this section %. So you can even try this here. If you write % and you write T and 10, you will get this thing. If you get this thing, so you have isNaN. If you have isNaN, think this. If you have isNaN, it will give you 0. Right, but what we want this thing. We want Tn must be called, so it will give a 10, and then it will do the %. So you will get a 10 value. That is a most important point. So now the question arises, how I know this is a function? It means in this argument this is a function. How I know? The answer is, anyone want to try? How I know this argument right now contain a function? Lakshay saying instance of. No, Lakshay, not the instance of, type of. Perfect, guys. So it means type of will give you an answer that tell you this is a function. And we will put here, if, think about it, if type of that argument of I is equals to function, because type of gives some value, and I am comparing if type of argument of I is equals to function. So I will call it, and I will call this thing arguments of I just call this thing. So when I call this, it will give a value. Think about it. When I call this, it will give a value. Now I need to store this value in some variable, let's say on n. Now the problem start. If I store it in n, this value might be string. Might be this function 10 is going to be written in double quotes 10, or might be it is going to return TEN 10. I don't know. So if I use n and I directly do the summation, so might be there are chances some wrong value will become. So I need to put this n on this argument I. Now there is a problem. I need to copy paste this code, or I have another chance to do this. I can do arguments of I. Makes sense, guys? If I do arguments of I, so that's the beauty of this programming, because it's a dynamic type. So arguments of I in this stage, think about it. In this stage, it is a function, and on this stage, it has become a value, because you call it, whatever the value is coming, you return it in this variable, and then the same code will run. I hope, guys, this you understand this thing. It means you are checking up. It is a function. So just call it and push it back on the same location. Now it is get override by the return value. So whatever the return value is coming up, it is here, and now it will go with the same procedure, right? So if we try this thing, add, and I'm saying 10, then I'm saying 10, then I'm saying 10, then I'm saying 10, right? So what would be the output? 30 now this time. Makes sense, guys? And if you just see, the number of lines of code which I have written is nothing. That's the beauty of this. And because of this beauty, and why I'm sharing this thing to all of you, the reason behind is, when you define this kind of function which is responsible to do this kind of stuff, right? So how I come up to this stuff, I inspired with this stuff that is called jQuery. So if you heard about this library, that's a library for JavaScript, right? What they does, they have created actually one function. They have created only one function. If you just Google it, you will see this is the name of the function they have created. So they have created a function called $. That is the name of function, and they call it. And for example, if they want to work on a text box, and let's say text box has the ID, so they will write hash and the ID of it. If they want to work on document, so they will write $ and then document. So they actually created a function which can take object, which can take string, which can take anything. So the same thing I am just showing you. So it means I'm just showing you the same idea I created for this ad. For this ad, I created the same idea. Make sense? Right. So Prapti, I have done a lot of things for last 5 minutes. I don't know from what you want to repeat, or either you can contact to this team and they share you the detail at the end of the training, because the session is get recorded. So if you face any issue, if you lost something, so you can see the recordings. Right. So the point is, guys, this is, we have created a function which can take anything, and same ideas. I pick it from the jQuery because jQuery does the same thing. So jQuery does the same stuff, right? And jQuery is created a one single function. So I just want to show you how they created. So they have created like this. They have created function jQuery because they already know JavaScript function is by default of loosely typed. So they already know the JavaScript function is of loosely type nature. So they have created I am jQuery. I'm just writing illusion code. So I'm writing I am jQuery, and they know you can pass anything. This function will be called. So they know if you pass jQuery and you pass hash some ID, this will call. If you pass some object, this will call. They know if you pass some array, this will call. So they already know this stuff. So that's why they have created only one function. And because they have created only one function, that's why the library size, if you just check it out, if you just go here and you will see that's a library. The library is a bigger word, right? So if you just go here and you try to download, let's say, some compressed version of this library. So this is the whole source library, right? This is the library they have written. If you just try to save this library, let's say I'm going to save it on downloads folder. And if you just see the size of the, that's an 89 KB, and they have created a whole library, right? So jQuery is nothing. It's a library written on top of JavaScript. And how they return this library, they have actually created a one single function. They have created only one top level single function. That's why I'm using a top level single function they have created. And that top level function take any argument. So I'm just giving a bridge why we create this kind of add function. So if somebody asks why you create this add kind of function which can take any argument, so you will say I'm creating a flexible function. That one function can does everything. Same I inspired from the jQuery, because jQuery does the same thing. They have created only one function because they already know JavaScript has a power. The power is it can take any argument. It can take ID, it can take document, it can take array, anything. Make sense? I hope this thing is clear. And they just want to ease more the thing. So they will saying var dollar equals to jQuery. So they does this thing. So they created a variable called dollar, and they don't want people use this bigger word called jQuery. So they remember the word called dollar, and that's why people are writing this stuff. So I just create the same illusion that jQuery does. Make sense? So when you learn jQuery, so it is much easier to you because you know the JavaScript, so you easily learn the jQuery stuff. So I hope you understand this thing. So we created a function jQuery, how the jQuery internal return this thing. I hope Shagun, this is clear to you also. What does the jQuery? So jQuery is just a library, and they have created a one top level function, and we are just mimicking the same thing. So I just mimic the same thing by using add function, right? So Sandeep is asking, I see most of them are using jQuery or Ajax explicitly. That's an old story, Sandeep. That's an old story. People are using jQuery. That's a story of my time when I was entirely full-fledged in the development time. So 2007, 2008 is a time for the peak time for the jQuery. That moment of time, JavaScript is not much more advanced like this. Now JavaScript has their own Ajax mechanism, and it is just a one word that I'm using. It has this one word to make an Ajax call. Ajax call means you can talk to the server in just a one word. That is possible by using the new versions of the JavaScript, right? So earlier jQuery providing these kind of stuffs, but there is no need, because if you download a jQuery, so it's a library, you need to download it, right? You need to download it. It means it will have your software, but JavaScript is unable in your browser, so no need to download anything, right? That's the beauty of this. Or now one more thing I want to address, Sandeep, that is jQuery has the animation stuff. That's a one best part of the jQuery, but it is take care by the CSS3. When you learn the CSS3, you will see how the animation will work. Okay, so that's why it's a time for the JavaScript. So that's why JavaScript is much mature right now. So CSS3 support is basically, it's again it's a JavaScript, and when you use a vanilla JavaScript, you can do anything, right? So there's a power of, if you think about jQuery, or there is a special library, if you just Google it, that is called anim.js for animation. So everything is coming from this vanilla JS, right? So that's why I'm using a word called vanilla. If you know, every ice cream is have the essence of vanilla. It means start with a vanilla, and then on top of it they put a chocolate flavor, or they put a butterscotch flavor, right? So that's a flavor, right? So jQuery is just a flavor, but the vanilla is JavaScript. It means if jQuery is saying I does this thing, so it means actually it is does by the JavaScript, right? So Priyanka is saying, what is dollar? Dollar is just a variable, Priyanka. jQuery is a function. I assign this function to a variable, right? Just like we did earlier, the same thing. So we assign a function in a dollar variable, right? And then your life is easy. You, instead of calling jQuery, you can call dollar, right? So Nirosh is saying toggling. Toggling, yes, of course, toggling we can do it by this JavaScript stuff, because it has a toggle features also, right? So far we have understand the loosely typed feature, and I hope you all have the confidence of this, how strong is the JavaScript and how we can create these kind of functions. Sandeep is asking, people are using TypeScript for the new framework as JavaScript is lengthy. No, it is not. TypeScript is something, Sandeep, for those people who is coming from, for example, like I start my career with Java, right? So I belongs to work on various banks like HDFC, ICICI. So I build a lot of stuff for major of banks. So I started my career with a Java, and you can think like Java is in my blood, because I work a lot of with Java. Now, if a Java guy want to switch to a JavaScript, it is very, very hard. It's a very hard journey, because Java mentality is object-oriented. JavaScript mentality is entirely the object-oriented. It's entirely the function. So when you move to the JavaScript, it means you are thinking everything on a functional style. But when you are in Java, you're thinking about the object-oriented style. So it means it's a shift of mentality. I mean, you're shifting the whole mentality to the functional programming. That's why TypeScript come in the picture. TypeScript is actually created by the Microsoft, and I told you that's some anomalic stuff. So what they did, they picked the JavaScript on top of JavaScript. So 90% JavaScript, 10% they have written TypeScript. They figured out what is the missing in the JavaScript. So they say, okay, class is missing. We will create a class. Inheritance is missing. We will create an inheritance. So they created the illusion of all of these things. So they have created those things which is very, very good for the object-oriented developers. So object-oriented developers who is coming from the Java, C#, those side who want to learn this stuff. So but I'm saying it's an illusion, because 90% is JavaScript. If you don't know JavaScript, you cannot learn TypeScript. So if you just go there and you just move to TypeScript website, right? TypeScript Lang, this is the website. So you will see the first word they have written, JavaScript at any scale, right? So they are completely saying JavaScript at any scale. It means they are saying if you're using an object-oriented programming, so you can go to a bigger kind of application, right? It has also the types, so it means they have the data types. So they have the data types, so you will lose the loosely typed. So what we are learning loosely typed thing, right? So think like TypeScript, JavaScript, and there are a lot of scripts in the market. Think like these all are like your arrows. Like Arjun has the arrows, different arrows. They have the Brahmastra and so many kind of arrows they have. So Arjun know when to use it, right? And how to use it. So same is for the developer. Developer know when I use TypeScript, where in which situation it is get fitted, where the JavaScript is get fitted. I hope Sandeep I answered your question. Right. So this is how the world is moving on, but it is not something is failing on, because whenever you write a TypeScript, it is get compiled and it is become JavaScript, right? So there is another thing. It means whatever that TypeScript you will write, it is compiled and converted into the JavaScript, because there is no single browser in the world who understands TypeScript. Every browser understands JavaScript, right? So that's the bottom line. So they are just creating an illusion for the developer. Okay, guys. So that's why community is some of the developers are saying I love TypeScript and I hate JavaScript. I'm saying 90% you are writing JavaScript, so how you can hate it, right? So I'm moving back here. We are here. We understand this stuff. So so far we understand the stuff of functions, how the functions are working right now, and now we are moving to some more things I want to clarify, because when you define a function, there are plenty of syntax to define a function. Like we have defined a basic function, so there are plenty of ways to define a function. Like we are defining a function in this way, function show, and then we are writing something console.log, and I'm saying I am a show function. That's a one way. There is a function declaration style, and I do show. The best part of this style, when you use function show, the best part is, for example, I am creating a function called display. Think about it. I'm creating a function display, but here I am not creating it. I am just typing it display, and from here bottom I am creating function display, right? And I am saying console.log, and here I am saying I am display, right? So think about it. When I am writing function display here, so it means I am trying to call this function. So I'm calling it, but I'm calling it here, but this is actually, bottom line is I am define it here, right? Definition is here. Remember this thing, define it here, but you're calling it here, right? So define it here, calling it here. How this is possible? Yes, it is possible, because JavaScript does function hosting. Like we learn variable hosting, the same thing they does function hosting. So when you define a function here, it will be get hosted. It will be here. So display will be go down automatically internally. Right. Now the pointer is the most important point I want to highlight. And this point is, we know JavaScript is handled by whom? By V8. V8 is what? It is an interpreter. And most of the website, I mean, I think 90% of the website saying JavaScript is interpreted language, but I just want to say JavaScript, if it is interpreted, so this line, it will generate an error, because this line will run and this function is not there. So who does this thing? Who does the hosting? That is always by the compiler. So bottom line is it internally doing the compilation stuff. That's why only the 10% of the website saying this thing. JavaScript has the compilation stuff. So it does the compilation stuff. So that's why it does the hosting. So whenever I'm talking the word about the hosting means it read the whole code. So whole code is read by the compilation process. It read the whole code and then it will put it on top level, this function, and then it put it the display there. So that's why we understand the fundamental that is called function hosting it will provide. I hope guys this thing is clear. So it is doing like variable hosting, it is doing the function hosting, and this is only and only possible when you're doing function display stuff, right? So if you run it, it would not generate any error. Any question guys so far? This is the important point which I highlighted. That is JavaScript doing the function hosting, so it will read the entire function stuff, and then it is actually shuffling the thing. It will put the function display top and then display calling and at the bottom. Internally it is doing it, but they are not showing it. So why 90% of the website saying it is only the interpretation? Because in any compilation programming, you will get an object code. When you use a C, when you compile it, you will get an object code, but here you're not getting any object code. Right, you're not getting an object code. It is directly running. That's why in this context they are saying that's an interpreted, but behind the scene it is doing the compilation stuff. It would not generate any intermediate obj kind of file, right? So that's why it is just run and execute the stuff, right? So function display is get hosted, and we are going to run this stuff and we will understand, is this working fine? So when I run this stuff, you will say I am display is coming up. Make sense guys? So we will understand function display doing this hosting stuff, right? So there is another way of creating a function, that is var. You use var and then let's say any variable name, and on right hand side you will assign a function. So it means you are defining a variable. So if you think about it, is much more like this, right? So it means 100 is assigned to f, here function is assigned to the q, right? So this is called what? When you write this line var f equal to 100, you know this is called variable, and you use a word called variable expression. So this is called variable expression word, right? and this word is called function expression. I hope this is clear why this is called function expression. I hope guys this makes sense. So this is called function expression now. So the pointer, what we have learned, that is we can assign a function to a variable by using a function expression. But the point to be remember, that is a point to be remember, when you do this where g equals to, when you do this where g equals to function, bottom line is when you specify where, variable is get hosted. Remember the point. When you define a variable on any line, it is get hosted on the top level. When it is get hosted on a top level, it is by default become var q. It means it is undefined. It has become undefined. So if you try to do q calling before it, right? If you try to do q calling before it, it means I am trying to do this stuff, this line of calling, it will generate an error. It will generate an error because you use var q equals to function. So it means your variable is get hosted, and it is get hosted, so it is by default become undefined, and you're calling undefined thing. It is not a function. It will give a type error there. Remember it. It will give a type error. It is not giving a reference error. It is saying type error because you have a type undefined and you are treating undefined like a function. That's why it is given type error. I hope guys this makes sense. So this is a function expression. We understand this is a function expression, and function expression is host, right? It is host, but it is host with undefined. It is host, but it is with undefined. But function, normal function is get hosted, right? So if we run console.log, I am a function expression, right? So Shweta, I am just saying when you create a var q equals to function, so it means you are assigning a function to the q variable. And as you know, when you assign a variable with a function, so your variable is get hosted. And when the variable is get hosted, whenever your variable is get hosted, so variable by default hosted as a undefined, right? We already did this thing. So it is become undefined. And for undefined, if you're calling undefined, so it will give a type error. Why it is give a type error? Because you have undefined type and you are treated like a function, right? So you need to remember the thing is when you create a normal function, it is get hosted. When you create a function expression, only the variable is get hosted. And if the variable is get hosted, it is hosted by an undefined value. And if it is hosted by undefined and you're trying to call undefined thing, it will give an error. That is a type error, not the reference error. I hope, Shweta, I answered your question. Okay, so I'm coming up your question, Diksha. So I'm just first running this thing. So when I run this thing, you will get an error, and you will say there's a type error, right? Because it is saying q is not a function. So it seems q is undefined, right? Q is undefined, right? So that's why this thing is happened. So there's a second way of creating a function. There's a second way of creating a function. So I'm coming to the Diksha question. If we directly write q equals to function, then also the error will occur. So if you think about it, if you define ww equals to 1000, so it has become a global variable. So if you do double r equals to function, so it has become a global. So it has become a global thing, right? So that's a dangerous thing. So do not do this. Always use with a var, right? So this is a function expression. Also we can call is an anonymous function. So Rohit is saying it's an anonymous. Yes, of course it is an anonymous because it does not have name. So correct word is because anonymous, you need to remember the thing, but this because it's an expression, so you can remember it. It's an expression, and when you remember it, it's an expression. So you remember it's an hosting feature is also there, right? I hope Diksha I answer your question as well as, and now Rohit, I answered that's an anonymous. You can also say. So the code would not work if write q after defining the function, right? Of course, Aryan, because if you do this, because the variable is undefined, that's why type error is coming. Nift is saying why call a function before defining? Because the pointer is when you are actually creating a bigger program, right? So you have your function is here and there, right? Here and there. It is not like we are creating 2 or 3 functions. So your function are plenty of functions, and you are calling the functions on based on some events. So might be your events, your function events would be on somewhere, right? So that's why some of the chances your functions would be on top level. So I just show you some sample, so you will have a brief of it. So I'm just opening my system VS Code, right? I just show you some samples of earlier batches. So for example, I'm just showing a to-do application in a previous batch we have created. So in this to-do app, if I open this controller, because we are using MVC pattern, so in this example, you will see there are plenty of code. And if you see, there is a function called init. And init function is called when the window is loaded. When the window is loaded, that init function is called. And init is going to call so many functions. You see, they are going to call so many functions. So if I click on this function, you will reach here. If you see, you are here. If I call bind events, if you're here bind events, so you're here, right? If I call update counts, right? So you're here, right? So the pointer is you create an init function, and bottom of there you define a lot of functions. If somebody call init first, so all of the functions will be called. So that functions must be get hosted. I hope I answer your question. It is how the code is get designed in a when you create a bigger code, right? So this is how the things are going on. So that's why we need to understand when the error is coming up, what is the reason the error is coming up, right? So far, guys, we have understand a lot of things. We understand reference types. We understand how to use a function as an argument. We understand console.dir stuff. We create a common function which will behave like a jQuery. We understand the thing called, that is how the functions get hosted, and we understand two kind of functions. Right, we understand two kind of functions. So far we have done these kind of stuff, and we have done for today. So it's time to take the doubts. If you have any query, any doubt, so you can pass your questions, because from next class, I mean the tomorrow, we are going to write code on VS Code, right? So I will share you a link on a WhatsApp group. So there is a link will be shared with all of you. So that's a video link. That video links is for the setup. So you just watch the video and then do the setup in your machine, right? And parallelly, it means you parallelly do the coding with me, right? So Nitesh, we will going to learn two more functions. That is one of the arrow function, and there is another one, right? So we're going to cover up, but because the time is up, that's why I'm not going to cover right now. So we understand two kind of functions. Two is left. So tomorrow we are going to start with the two kind of functions, and then we are moving to the VS Code stuff, because we are very familiar with this stuff, and this stuff is really important, because like I told you why I'm doing this code in this Chrome, because when any code is taking a problem on production, I mean the production means live environment. If customer is complaining, I just do right click inspect and I just check it out. That's the beauty of this, right? So that's the beauty of this. So if you do right click inspect, so you understand every stuff, and once this thing is clear, then we put it in a VS Code. So now we are very much familiar with this stuff. So I will share a video link, so you just walk through with that video link, and then you follow that link, and we will use some HTML and CSS stuff. So we will use some basic HTML and CSS stuff. We learn some basic HTML and CSS with the JavaScript. Once we familiar with basic HTML CSS with JavaScript, then we do separately HTML CSS, right? So this is what the plan is going on, right? So at least, because the more concentration on the logic part, less concentration on the design part, because so we start with HTML and CSS stuff, the very basic stuff. So we able to design the page, and once we able to correct all of this, so next Saturday we are going to get more deep on the HTML side, right? On the CSS side, right? Anubhav, I answer your question. So Shagun, variable hosting I already cover in first half video, right? So variable hosting says when you define a variable hosting, I think I also cover it here also. So when we do the variable hosting, it's with a let versus var, because whenever you define a var, your variable is get hosted, right? It is get hosted on top level. So it is available. So if you try to run this code, so you will get an answer, Shagun, because whenever you specify var here, so it is on top. If you just scroll it down here, because I share this code. So if you just walk through with this code, so here let and here is the var. So when you define this var, so it will be get hosted here, right? If it get hosted here, so it is accessible throughout the function, right? So if same I does it here, when I define var q equals to function, so it means your variable is hosted, and it would be on top, right? So this variable, because it is hosted, so it is not assigned. If it is not assigned, so it is by default undefined. And if it is undefined and you try to calling it, so it is undefined, so it will say it is a type error because it's undefined, it's not a function. Make sense? So that's why this variable hosting is going on when you use var, but when you use let, it never be host, right? So you cannot access the variable, so it will give a reference error, it will not give a type error, right? Okay, now somebody is asking, Abhishek is asking for the link of the book. Link of the book, I think you need to just search it out. Is there any free book? I think Speaking with JavaScript is available freely, but head first, I'm not sure. So Speaking with JavaScript PDF, if you write, so there would be a link, right? So there would be links like this, PDF drive or something. So you can type and you can download it. But head first JavaScript, I'm not sure is there a link or not. So GitHub there is a link for this. So you can use these kind of links and you can download it, right? Right, guys. So I'm done from today. Any question, any query? So this is the main picture, so you can understand this thing. So Rohit is asking, you're asking something for the DOM. We will cover up when we connect with an HTML, right? So we are right now on the basic JavaScript. So we understand the core JavaScript that we are running. We are learning right now, and alert, prompt, these things we will learn when we are doing the DOM manipulation stuff, right? Then it makes sense. Okay, so meanwhile, I'm just sharing the code to all of you, so you can have an access at least. Then I'm taking the questions. So today code, this is the today code. So I'm just giving P2 part 2 as a. So we will learn how to use a Git. That's a part of this training. We will learn, but first of all, we learn the code. So you have two options, either Git or either GitHub. GitHub I'm using right now. GitHub is basically the GUI environment. So you need to just create an account on it, and then you create a repository. There is a button called create a repository. Once the repositories get created, you can push your code anyhow, right? So like I'm pushing it here. So I just go to the download section. This one, this is our code. So I just drag it and just drop it. Your code is get uploaded, right? And I just comment it out. So push, you understand. I think pull we will learn when we learn the Git. So we'll I mean we are out of track if I am right now talking about the Git, because right now our only concentration on the JavaScript stuff. Okay, so the code is there and it is on the same link, right? And it has two files, and I'm just sharing the link again to all of you on a chat window, right? So you can pick everything from this location. So I shared the link with all of you. So the code is I uploaded, and now I'm moving to the question side, right? So I am done for today. If you have any questions, guys, so you can, because till 4:30 I am taking the questions, right? So if you have any questions, so you can keep asking your questions. So I'm picking questions one by one.
All those who have doubts can remain in the session and others can leave. And please tomorrow be there at 10:45 a.m. in the morning, so that in case you have any connection issues, we can solve them before time. And sir will be joining for the class exactly at 11. So I want all the participants to join 15 minutes earlier of that.